Okay, so for part two, what we're going to do is walk through the entity definition for the work and follow it through. So we start with the definition and scope. A work is a distinct intellectual or artistic creation, that is, the intellectual or artistic content. So imagine the work as it exists in the author's mind before it has actually achieved some kind of expression in terms of language. Okay. Now, in the pre-recording, RDA has provided us with some references. It says the term work may refer to a number of different classifications of work, and these categories in the beginning are structural ones. It could be when we use the term work, we could be referring to an individual work, a part of a work, an aggregating work, augmenting, diachronic, integrating, metadata, serial, etc., etc. If the term is italicized, it means there's a formal glossary definition. At least I think so. Okay. You can also categorize works according to their intended content or context. So cartographic, what did I do here? Cartographic, legal, musical, object, official communication, etc. The important thing to recognize about these different forms of work is that according to RDA, as far as RDA is concerned, all of these are considered to be work, and they're all subsumed under the entity work. So there's no sub-entity called cartographic work. There's no sub-entity called musical work or anything like that. If it's regardless of whether it's a successive work, a part of a work, a photographic work, a religious work, they are all considered to be work as the entity in RDA. So you don't have to go hunting for an entity called musical work or an entity called still image work. And after that, we have mentioned that this is an entity subtype and that the supertype is RDA entity. And it gives us a number of instructions. Okay. And guidelines. So it says, first of all, describe an instance of an entity by recording a metadata description set that consists of one or more metadata statements using one or more elements assigned to the entity. So, in other words, in order to describe the work, you have to produce a set of metadata descriptions, and at least one. And so what you'll be doing is identifying certain elements that have been assigned to it and giving a value to them to show us what the work is. It tells us that an element may be used more than once, so we're not confined to just one. Use one or more of the recording methods to identify or label an entity. So use either unstructured, structured, IRI, or identifier to identify or label an entity. And then this one, use one recording method to provide an appellation or IRI of an entity as a value of a relationship element. Okay, true confessions time here. I do not know what that means. One of these days, perhaps I will. For guidelines on recording relationships between a work and its subjects, see a section on guidance, the introduction to RDA, data elements, subjects. It then gives you a sense of where to go for guidance on recording a description of the work in the section describing the work, and for guidance on RDA itself and data structure, it gives you a section there. So it gives you it gives you a number of guidelines and places to go if you need further explanation. We then have the minimum description. This is what you absolutely must have for a work to be considered acceptable in RDA. It has to have, first of all, what we call an appellation of the work. And by appellation, we mean the label. And the label can take one of three forms. The title, in terms of the preferred title of the work, the authorized access point for the work, or the identifier for the work. Okay. Now we are going to be focusing on the second and third here. You will be required to provide an authorized access point for a work and an identifier for the work. Okay. And as I said last week, these will be nomens, and these nomens will function as what RDA calls an appellation. It is that essential label that you put on your chest saying, "Hello, my name is Grant." Okay, this is the label of the work, and it takes the form of, it will take, in our case, it will take the form of access point and identifier. In addition, RDA tells us that a work must have one of the following two elements. It must have an expression, or it must have a manifestation. So you can't just have a work in a library environment. You can't just simply have a work floating about without it being connected to some form of expression or some kind of manifestation. So there's got to be a reference to an expression, perhaps in the form of a translation or something else, but there's got to be some kind of expression that's linked to it. Failing that, there's got to be a manifestation. There's got to be some kind of published manifestation of the work. It's very hard to define expression and manifestation without doing what you shouldn't do in definitions, which is use the term you're defining in the definition. For a bare minimum, a work has to have an appellation in the form of some kind of nomen, which in our case will be the access point and the identifier. It also needs some kind of expression or some kind of a manifestation. And this is the bare minimum that you need. We then go on to effective description. And effective description is simply recording elements that are deemed useful for identification and access. Record elements that are specified by an application profile. So what that means is that we'll go down to the bottom here for a second, and you find all of the elements that have been assigned to the entity work. Okay? And it's important to recognize that these have been very strictly assigned. Okay? So these elements are explicitly assigned to the work, and you can only use them in relationship to the work. And you have a list of attributes, and you have a list of relationships. And your job as in terms of an application profile would be going through this list of attributes and saying, okay, in order to create an effective description of the work, not a minimum, but an effective description, which elements do I wish to use? And which elements do I wish to order all of the catalogers in my system to use? Okay, so this is where your understanding of your users, your understanding of your library, your understanding of the context of information use that you're dealing with comes into play here, because here you're making a decision on the basis of your community, on the basis of the materials, on the basis of the kind of job that a catalog should be doing. What are the elements that we're going to use? Okay, now I'm going to stop there. Because the next section is very long, and we will deal with that in part 3. This is where we'll be talking about the entity boundaries.